Hi, welcome to the introduction to 3D Studio Max presented by 3dturtle.com. My name is Isaac Oster, and in this lesson I'm going to talk about creating and editing primitives. The primitives panel is located here. With the geometry icon selected, this is in the create menu. Geometry selected and then standard primitives selected here in the drop down will give you this menu here. So we'll start with something simple. I'm going to turn the grid on by hitting G. Again, the hotkey for grid is G. And the reason I want the grid on is because when I create these, Max is going to want me to basically draw them on this grid. So if I don't know where the grid is, it's hard to get them to show up. So I will select box. And when I do this, what you can see is I get some creation parameters here, and for now I'm going to leave them at the default settings. And just go ahead and click and drag, and I release the mouse, and my next drag is going to be the height, and I can click again. And so long as I'm still in create menu or create mode, I can change some of these settings. And I have wireframe turned on now, or edged faces, which you can toggle using the F4 key. And you can see as I drag up on these sliders here, I'm getting additional segments. I can also change the length and width and height. Now if I hop over to the modify panel, you'll see I have all of that same stuff. So I can come back and dynamically edit this in the same way. Okay, so that's box. Sphere is going to work in a very similar way. I'm just going to select sphere here and do a click and drag. And while I still have the original sphere selected, I can change its creation parameters here, segments and radius. If I want to hop over to modify panel for a moment, those same characteristics are editable here as well, but when I go back to the create panel, I can't do it anymore. You can only edit it from the create panel while you're there after you just made it. But again, that stuff is all still available to you here in the modify panel. So there are some trim operations you can do. Hemisphere is going to do a latitudinal trimming, so a vertical trimming. I can show what that looks like. As I click here and slide up, it just trims right off. And with chop, it's not going to pay much attention to what the parameterization is, where the edge flow is. It's just going to trim it. But with squash, it will try to preserve the edge flow and just scale everything uniformly. So this is what squash looks like. Slice is going to cut it the other way. So with slice on, I can do a slice from, or a slice to. Back to the create panel. Next I'll show you cone. So I'm going to do a click, drag, release, and then click again. And that will give me the ability to change this upper radius here. So in the create panel, I've got radius 1, radius 2, height segments, etc. So radius 1 is going to be the bottom radius. Radius 2, top radius. Height segments. Cap segments is something you've got to look at the bottom for. And sides. If I turn wireframe off by hitting F4, I can turn smooth off and on, and you can see what that's doing. Turn F4 back on. And slice, which we just saw with the sphere, works the same way, from and to. Geosphere is kind of like a soccer ball. change the radius, segments. And then there is geodesic base type, tetra, octa, and icasa. So there is hemisphere, which will just give you half of a sphere. Turn that off and on. And then base to pivot. What that means is it's going to move the base of the geometry to the pivot point. So if I turn that on, it just floats it there on the grid. And just to show you again, if I click on modify, all of those same features are available there as well, but back to create and they're gone. Next we do cylinder. So I'm going to click and drag, release and drag, and then click again. And the radius, height segments, cap segments, and that's going to be reflected on both sides, and sides, slice, to and from, next we have tube. So click, drag, release, drag, click, and drag. And radius 1 is the outside radius, radius 2 is the inside radius, height segments, gap segments, sides. So you can see a lot of these are going to be pretty similar, so I'll probably just speed this up a little bit and run through the next few without going through all of the same permutations. So there's torus. So let's click and drag, and then a release and drag, and there you go. So there's radius 1 and radius 2. This one's got some other features that don't show up on the others. Rotation, twist. You can see it's got a twist around its axis this way, which is showing up here. Segments and sides, very similar. Smooth. Slice again. Okay. Pyramid. Click, drag, release, drag. Width, depth, and height, and you can change the segment count. And I'll save Teapot for a minute, and we're going to do plane. Plane's pretty simple. There is the length and width segments. In this case, I'm going to turn grid off by hitting G, just to make it a little easier to see what's going on. Alright, so last we have Teapot, and I'll turn grid back on by hitting again G and drag it out. So here is Teapot. Teapot is kind of a legacy piece of geometry. Back in the old days when they were developing rendering technologies, they needed a surface that had a lot of different kinds of convex and concave shapes, and so some guy created this Teapot, and it was before the days of modeling, so he actually you can look it up on Wikipedia. I encourage you to check it out. He actually entered this in as a series of vertices and coordinates, so I can't even imagine what that must have been like, but I'm glad that we have 3D Max to make our lives easier. So there's Teapot. So that'll do it for standard primitives. I'm going to click on the standard primitives drop down here and select extended primitives. So here we have Hydra, which is a pretty wild shape here. There's some different versions of it. And chamfer box. So click, drag, release, drag, and then click again and drag. And so what you can see is it's just a box with a chamfered edge on it. And you can modify the length, width, and height like a regular box, but then you can also come in and modify the depth of that fillet there. And you can additionally add segments to round it off. Next we have oil tank. So I'm going to do a click and drag, and release and drag, and another click and drag. Next we have a variation on cylinder called spindle. So we can do a click and drag, and a release and drag, and then another click and another drag, and then click, and it's done with creation. And an additional variation on cylinder called gang gun. Click and drag, release, drag, click, and drag. So that's gang gun. Next is ring wave, which is awesome, but I don't know what you would use it for. Click and drag, and then another drag and a click. So there's ways you can modify the wave on the inside using all kinds of unusual little sliders over here, so that you can certainly experiment with this one on your own. Next we have prism. So I'm going to click and drag, and while I'm dragging this way I'm making it wider, and while I'm dragging it this way I'm making it taller. So if I release it, now I can do a skew on it, click again, and drag up, and there's my prism. Next we have torus knot. So the first click drag will give the overall radius, and the next will be the radius of the tube. Chamfer cylinder is going to be a click, drag, release, and then click again and release, and the next drag will be the chamfer edge, and you can, the fillet edge, and you can change that. And if you want to make it rounder, modify the fillet segment number. Capsule looks a lot like oil tank. Drag it, click drag, and then release, and the next drag will be the height there. Alright, next we've got LEXT, which stands for extrusion. The way this one works is you do a click and drag, and you can see how this works. When I release, I'm going to be able to give it height, and when I click again, I give it wall thickness. So C extrusion works very similarly. I'm going to do a click and drag. If I release, the next drag will do height, and then I click again, and drag will give me wall thickness. Sometimes you got to kind of move the mouse in a few different directions to find out which way it's calculating to get the thickness to change. And finally we've got hose. So click and drag, and when you release and drag again, you'll get the vertical height. So there are a few options here I'll go over. There's round hose, and you can change the number of sides. There's rectangular hose, and D-section hose. If you want this to be a little bit rounder, there's round sides here, set to 4 by default, but you could increase that. And that pretty much sums up the extended primitives. I want to talk about just a couple of the compound objects, specifically Boolean and Loft. Okay, so if you saw the episode on splines, you may already be familiar with what a Boolean is, but it's essentially just a way to combine two different pieces of geometry. So I'm going to hop over to the standard primitives and make a couple of things to work on. First I'll start with a box, and then I'll make a sphere. And just hit W to go to move mode and scoot the sphere so it's crashed into the box there. And I'm going to hide the grid to make this a little easier to see what's going on. So back to compound objects, and I will select the box, and when I do, a lot more of these become available, and I'm looking here at Boolean specifically. So select it and we get these menu options. So there's pick Boolean, and then within the parameters operands, and then operation. So for the operands, it knows that I want box 001 to be part of it because that was what was selected when I entered Boolean mode, but it's not sure what I'm looking for the operand B. So once I've got everything else figured out, I can click pick operand B and then select the sphere, and the Boolean operation will happen. So I'll start with union as an operation and select pick operand B and click it. So it's not just combining the geometry. What it's actually doing is cutting edges in both faces, or both pieces of geometry, and making it one. And if I hit wireframe, go to wireframe mode by hitting F3, what you can see is the inside has been removed. So I'm going to hit undo and select intersection. Pick operand B, select the sphere, and the geometry that's left over is what was inside those two crashed pieces of geometry. So here we have the box, and here we have what's left of the sphere. Subtraction of A minus B, pick operand B, so there's that. And the inverse, B minus A, there's that. And then cut. And I'm going to select refine, pick operand B. And what this does is it takes the intersection of these two surfaces and creates an additional edge on the starting surface. So if I go to wireframe again and hit F3, you can see there's nothing inside. It's just this edge cut into the original piece of geometry. Okay, so for Loft, we're actually going to start this with a couple of splines. So I'm going to go to the shape menu, and with the spline selected here, I'm going to make circle, and doesn't really matter where I put it. And I'm going to make a line. And right click to exit creation mode and head back over to the compound objects. With the line selected, I can click Loft, and I have two buttons here, Get Path and Get Shape. So I'm going to select Get Shape and select the circle. So you can see what's happened here. It took this shape and extruded it along this path. So within the creation menu, there are some skin parameters. If I expand this, I can toggle whether or not I want a cap at the beginning, a cap at the end. And then there are shape steps and path steps. So shape steps is going around this way, and path steps is going to be the number of edge cuts here between each vertice in the path. So as I increase this, I get a smoother extrusion. I can edit this further by going over to the Modify panel and expanding Loft. So here we have Shape and Path. So I'm going to just click on Path, and what you can see is it remembers that path was a line. So now I can expand on that, and if I go to F3, you can see there's one vertice, there's another vertex, there's another vertex, and I've got my Bezier handles on them. So I can rotate those verts, and the extrusion will update. the shape is going to live over here now. So if I get shape, I can select it. It gets moved to the origin, or moved to the beginning of the extrusion. And I can scale it and do all kinds of things like this. So I'm not just limited to simple shapes like this. It can get more complicated. Let me show you a couple of those. So I'm going to go to the top view by hitting T, and back to create, and splines, and line, and I'm going to turn grid snap on. So this is snap, and I right click to get my options, and I can see I've got grid points selected, and click and click. Perspective to go back to or P to go back to perspective mode. I'm going to turn the snaps toggle off, but leave angle snaps turned on so that I can rotate this so that it is vertical. And now I'm going to create a line. And it picked a pretty hard color to see there. It's purple. I'm just going to come over and make it something a little bit brighter. Okay. Select the path. Go to Compound Objects, Loft. Select the shape, or press the Get Shape button and select this. And what you can see is I now have a nice conduit, or road, or curbside, or whatever. Okay. I want to show you one more version of this. Back to shape, and I'm going to create a circle, but I'm going to turn off start new shape. So what this means is each new circle that I draw gets added to a single spline object. And helix. Go to create. And increase the number of turns a little bit. Again, a hard color to see, so I'll grab something a little brighter. And select the helix. And loft. And get shape and my original circles. And you can see, get some pretty complicated shapes very quickly and very easily. And they're editable without too much trouble. So that's Loft. Okay, the next thing I'd like to talk about are some architectural elements that are available. If you drop down here, you will see doors, windows, and stairs. So I'll just show you a few of these. Here's doors. You do a click. Oops, I've got to pick one. I'll grab pivot. Click and drag. That's going to be the width. When I release, the next drag will be the depth, and then the next drag is the height. So I'm sort of running out of screen here, so I'll make these short doors. But as with everything else, I can increase the height using the creation parameters. Bifold. Sliding. And windows, awning, it's going to work the same way, do a click and a drag. So the first click drag is for width, the second one is for depth, and the third is height. And say if you've got exactly what the dimensions of your window are, we can say it's going to be 4 meters high by 3.5 meters wide. This is a big window, and 0.2 of a meter thick. Do sliding. And stairs. I think stairs are sort of interesting, and I have actually used these in a production environment. Straight stair. Click and drag. Click and drag, and then up. And while you're still in the creation menu here, you can add some features. You can give it a handrail, stringers, close it, and you can modify all of these things as well. U-type stair. So I left creation mode by hitting the right mouse button. So now if I want to modify it, I need to come over to the Modify tab, and I can make it a little wider, add a handrail, back to the Modify panel, or the Create panel, L-type, and spiral. And all of the elements are toggleable, and you can modify everything. So this is really useful for blocking in geometry if you need to have a placeholder or an idea of how much space something needs. Make sure the wall fits around it. Very, very useful. So this has been Primitives in Max. I hope you found it to be enjoyable. Stay tuned. The next episode will be on editable polys. Thanks a lot.